Chris Duffin here. I'm going to talk about the rehab process, or more specifically, the philosophy of rehab. So it's been interesting this last couple weeks. I've posted about a recent injury that I've had. Tore my quad, fairly minor tear, but there was a distinct pop, leg swelled up an extra inch, some bruising. Couldn't do a body weight squat, and over a 2-week period, I was back up to doing 860 pounds for reps. And this isn't the first time. Anybody that's followed my stuff for a long time has seen me walk through and do stuff like this that generally people wouldn't believe that you can accomplish. I've seen this happen several times when I've had to go and rehab something. And so a lot of people think that there's like some special tool or process. Oh, it's the Graston, it's the PRP, it's the ART, it's the electroacupuncture, it's the what have you, prolotherapy. I've done all of that and more, and it's not the specific treatment. Those are all tools, but it's understanding how to use those tools and use them appropriately, and that's where I talk about the philosophy of rehab. And this is where I said it's been interesting on social media, because in the past I published these these results via either written articles or YouTube, and so immediately I posted, I injured myself, here's a video of me doing it, and a couple days later, here I am doing some movement, and I get these comments of, dude, bro, you gotta rest. You icing it? Taking ibuprofen? And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm doing. Okay, so we're gonna talk about movement, and movement is king. Movement is a healer, but it's not just moving blindly, and we'll get to that in a minute. But moving, think about this from a very broad scope. You're a lifter. Why do you lift? Because when you lift, you recover and grow stronger and bigger. If you don't lift, what happens? You shrink and get smaller. Okay, so if we want to recover from an injury, which methodology would you pick from is your tool, is in a big scope? Probably the one that's going to actually make you grow and recover, right? So we want to move. And the reason movement does that, it releases a lot of growth factors, stimulates blood flow. There's a lot of just mental stuff that goes on as well. And there's also neural factors that go into the rehab process, and we'll talk about that are all primed via movement as well. So that's where we want to go. We want to move as frequently as we can, and we want to push the boundaries of our movement. So we're not saying, I hurt myself, just fucking ignore that. Let's get back into the gym and let's push through this. No, do not do that. We do not ever want to move into pain. Let's be very clear about this. We want to find out where those limits are, and we want to, every time that we move, see if we can push that a little bit further. Push it a little bit further. Find out those boundaries. So there's no fixed process for knowing, at day 3 I can do this, and day 7 I should be doing, squatting with this amount of weight. You've got to discover that every single time, what that capability is. Every day, multiple times a day. So a lot of people don't realize when I injured myself, usually I'm training maybe 3 or 4 times a day. Even when I was an executive, I was at my desk, after a post-injury, and I'm doing movement drills, taking a break several times during the day to do that. Maybe grabbing a band and going out to the warehouse and doing some movement with it. So it is work. You've got to do it. You don't want to push into fatigue, and you don't want to, again, push into pain. We want to discover what those are. But that's how we progress. That's how we move, right? But it's not just a lot of people think it's just blood flow that you're doing. You're stimulating blood flow. No, you're not just doing sloppy squats. So there's something that went wrong with your movement, right? So there's a couple things that need to happen. One, we need to re-ingrain the correct pattern. So we need to be very cognizant of how we move, how we brace, how we position, all our postural stuff, how we're cueing our, we need to practice perfection. The other part of that is we want to prime those pathways, because that's part of the body's response is to, it's tightening those muscles up, trying to protect you from hurting yourself. So we need to slowly teach the body again that it's safe to move in those ranges of motion again. So we want to restore full movement to those ranges of motion. And it's not just, we're not talking about stretching and just getting range of motion. We want a range of motion that we can apply power in. So as we're doing it, again, there's a lot of neural synapses that we need to get moving correctly. We need to reset the body and tell it, it's safe to move in this range of motion again, okay? It's safe, and this is how we want to move, okay? So in that, now we can understand, okay, I need to use some, soft tissue manipulation, some dry needling, whatever have you. It doesn't mean, one, we just damage tissue. So we don't want to go in and beat the hell out of our tissue, right? It's going to be, that's going to make things a little worse. But temporarily, we may need to shut down those mechanisms because we know that we're going to do safe movement. We're going to be doing some body weight stuff, some really remedial stuff, trying to move through that range of motion, working on quality of movement. So if I've got some restrictions in there, I'm going to use, like in this instance of my quad, I used several different, did some Graston style work with ISATM tools, did a lot of our active mobilization with a boomstick and AccuBalls, and did that, cleaning that up so that I wasn't, compensating or not able to move in those range of motions because we had some restrictions going on. Clean that up. Then I move, right? Then I move frequently. Then I address where I'm at again. So it's not just randomly beating up those tissues. Now, if I've got somewhere that's like a low blood flow area, like I tear a groin or something like that, you may want to look into doing something like some PRP treatment or something like that that's going to stimulate that process, because that movement is going to, just moving isn't going to get you as much, blood flow in those areas as you need. Now you need to be careful. PRP treatments and stuff like that, if you're in tested organizations, while it is legal and you can go to your doctor and maybe covered under health insurance, is not WADA approved. So, just do your research. So from there, like I said, we're moving cleanly, we're moving frequently, we're pushing those boundaries. Now we're using the tools to enable us to do that as we need to. So the next thing to understand is that, you're focusing on a site of dysfunction, something that was injured. And now we're doing as much as we can to get that area recovered and working well as possible. But it is likely not the culprit. So what we want to do is understand that there's usually, almost always, a site of painless dysfunction. Something that drove, something that was wrong, something, we got injured because we either weren't moving correctly, or there's potential that your training program is not appropriate and you're accumulating more fatigue than you're recovering from. But even so, there's still likely some opportunity elsewhere in the body that isn't working right. So in my example here, I started moving and then progressing through a series of movements. And in that progression, like let's say it was my VL that I had the tear in, I found that rotation of the hip was aggravating that VL. So that had me go back and go, well, let's take a look at the glute and piriformis that should be doing the rotation of the hip where I was having the issues, and spent more work cleaning that up. And in that process, then that alleviated some of those restrictions and that pain that was happening in the VL almost immediately. So there was some opportunity. I had some nice nodding and stuff going on there. It just wasn't working quite right. And that VL was overcompensating and picking up, which is how we ended up in that issue. Now, I would never discover that if I didn't move through, well, basically the movements and understanding what's going on in those movements. But it's just really critical, just a fundamental thing to understand is your injury is typically not due to the area that failed itself. There is some other area that we need to focus on. We need to go upstream and understand what's driving that. Where is the painless dysfunction of the body? Because we don't want the same injury to happen again, which we see all the times, right? Or the injury may shift to something else because, again, we never dealt with that same issue. So, the output may have been the VL another time. It might have been something else yet again here in another month, month after that. And we see this all the time. You'll see it with elite athletes. All of a sudden they'll get one injury, and then over the next year, it's another injury, and another injury, and another injury. They're related. We are a system. So you have to look at it from a systematic perspective, and that's really important to understand. So as a whole, this covers my philosophy or general philosophy on a typical rehab rehabilitation process, right? So we want to move frequently, cleanly, working on as much like good, clean neural firing as we've got. We want to push the limits, but never move into pain. We want to use our other tools to be able to remove restrictions to allow us to do that. We want to stimulate, again, as much of those growth factors release because that's what training does, right? We want to heal, we want to recover, we want to stimulate blood flow. With that in mind, I didn't discuss, but the ice that was brought up, I avoid ice at all times unless you need it for pain management. We're going to apply heat and not heat ice. It would be heat yet again. So anytime you have opportunity to sit down, do it with heat, not with ice. So from there, we use our tools again to remove any restrictions to allow us to move as much as we can, cleanly as we can, and progress as frequently as we can so we can get back into training. In the process, we want to try to uncover the root causes. What is that painless dysfunction? What are the things that drove me to have the injury to happen in the first place so I can not deal with the injury repeating itself or turning into another set of injuries? Again, a lot of tools at your disposal, and encourage you to look at those. Obviously, Kabuki Strength, we sell a number of tools, the ones I used in this process, and look forward to you living better through strength. Chris Duffin out.